As we saw in the last video, the derivative is not going to distribute nicely over multiplication or division. We're going to have to use this new derivative rule called the product rule to help us with functions that cannot be simplified. So the product rule says if y equals f of x times g of x, if we're multiplying those two functions together, then the derivative y prime is equal to f prime of x times g of x plus f of x times g prime of x. Sometimes I'll try and simplify this a little bit. There's kind of a lot of x's that can be a little bit confusing to look at. I like to write this just as f prime times g plus f times g prime. This is a derivative rule, a formula that you will 100% need to know, so you will want to have this memorized. I would make sure that this formula is starred or circled, easy to find somewhere in your notes. So in this video, I just want to practice using the product rule to find some derivatives. So in our first example, which is apparently example B instead of example A, but we'll roll with it, says y equals 2x times e to the x. The first thing we want to do is we want to identify which of our functions is f of x and which of our function is g of x. I think that identifying when to use the product rule can be one of the trickiest parts about it. So it takes a lot of practice to get used to identifying when you need to use the product rule. So homework's going to be really important in these next few sections. So when I look at this, you want to try and pick this complicated function apart into two simpler functions that we know how to take the derivative of. So when I look at this, I see here's 2x. Well, I know how to take the derivative of that. I can just use my power rule there. So I'm going to call f 2x. And in fact, let's just find the derivative right now. F prime is going to be 2. That must mean that g is everything else in my function, which is just e to the x. So g is e to the x. And as we know from our last section, g prime of x is, well, still e to the x power. So when I go to find my derivative, y prime, if I use my product rule, it says f prime times g plus f times g prime. I would encourage you to write that formula out the first few times until it kind of settles in and you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. So f prime, that's going to be 2 times g, so that's times e to the x, plus f, which is 2x, times g prime this time, well, that's e to the x. And honestly, I think if you wanted to leave your answer like this, that would be perfectly fine. I could, if I wanted to, I could get rid of this multiplication symbol here and say, well, that's 2e to the x plus 2x times e to the x. The other thing I might want to do, especially if I was working with this derivative a little bit more after the fact, I might want to factor out, say, 2e to the x, since that is a common factor between our two terms, and then that would leave me with 1 plus x. So I think either one of these is perfectly fine. If you don't want to factor right now at this point, that's okay, but there will be some problems that we'll see coming up later on in this section that where it'll be more helpful to have it in that factored form. So in our next example, let's take a look at y equals 4x cubed times natural log of x. Again, I want to identify what is f of x and what is g of x. And you're breaking this down into two functions that you know how to take the derivative of. So I look at this and I see here f of x, I think should be 4x cubed. So off to the side, let's have f equal 4x cubed. And f prime, the derivative of that, well, using my power rule, we've got 12x squared. G must be natural log of x. And we know how to take the derivative of that from our last section, g prime. Well, that's just 1 over x. So again, if we write out that product rule formula, f prime times g plus f times g prime, our derivative, y prime, is going to look like f prime, so that's going to be 12x squared, times g, so times the original function g over here, which is natural log of x, plus f, so let's see, that's going to be 4x cubed, times g prime, that is 1 over x. Here in this case, I definitely would simplify this. In particular, it's this second term right here that I think can be simplified. The first term we can't do much with. We can say, okay, well, that's 12x squared times natural log of x, plus if I multiply these two, this is really 4x cubed over 1. So this would be 4x cubed over x, or you might see that right away and say, well, I can simplify that to be 12x squared natural log of x plus 4x squared. I think that's a good stopping point, but again, if you wanted to go a little bit further, if you wanted to factor this, we can factor out 4x squared, and then that would leave me with, oh, let's see, I've got 3 natural log of x plus 1. Either one of these, I think, is a great answer for this particular problem. Now, as we progress through these, you might start to feel a little bit more confident throughout these problems using the product rule as we get more and more experience with it. So you may not need to write out what is f and what is g and what is f prime and what is g prime every single time. If you feel comfortable figuring those out as you work through the problem, that is perfectly fine. And in fact, I would encourage you to do that because it's going to speed up some of these problem-solving processes. If you feel like you need to continue to use this as to keep writing out f prime, g prime, then go ahead and do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If it helps you get the problem right, then keep on doing it. But as we get more experienced, I might be able to look at a problem. So like our last example here, y equals 8 times e to the x times natural log of x. If I look at that, I might say, okay, well, I think 8 times e to the x, that would make a good function f. I know how to take the derivative of 8e to the x. And then natural log of x, I think that would be a good function g. I know how to, again, take the derivative of that. That's going to be 1 over x. So if I write it out, I know I'm working with f prime times g plus f times g prime. And I can sort of figure out some of these derivatives as I work through these problems. So y prime is going to be f prime, so the derivative of 8e to the x, well, that is actually still going to be 8e to the x power. Times g, so this time I'm going to leave natural log of x alone, so we'll leave it as natural log of x, plus f. This time I leave 8e to the x alone, so that's just 8e to the x, times g prime times the derivative of natural log of x. That's going to be 1 over x. Here I would just simplify this perhaps a little bit. I would probably write this out as 8e to the x times natural log of x plus, here I can write this second term as 8e to the x divided by x. If you wanted to leave it like that, that's fine. But again, if you wanted to factor it, and there will be cases where factoring will be helpful to us, you can also factor out 8e to the x, and then that would leave me with natural log of x plus 1 over x. So I think one of these two would be a really good final answer for this problem. So make sure you get lots of practice in with the product rule and with the quotient rule coming up here too, because these are formulas that we're going to be using quite a bit throughout this course. So it's going to be really, really important that we have a handle on them and that we feel comfortable finding derivatives using these new rules.